Day 1227 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,024,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,120 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 2 tanks, 10 APVs, 50 artillery, and 1 rocket launcher. And with lots happening today, we'll jump right into a super brief weekly look at the territory of control stats, where Russia picked up a 0.02% increase in captured Ukrainian land over the past 7 days. It could have potentially been higher this week, but Russia does have that small, teeny tiny issue of an adversarial party of Ukrainian defenders who don't like being invaded, who in turn liberated some of their own lands this week too. Although before looking at that and heading into the map, where dozens of Ukrainian kamikaze drones and missiles have been launched onto targets throughout Russia overnight, in Rostov, Russian monitoring channels were reporting incoming drones, and with other reports suggesting Ukrainian Air Force Su-24 jets were said to have launched Storm Shadow cruise missiles into this region. If true, this is certainly something that would mark a fairly significant update in Ukraine's strike tactics, but the weapon of choice was most likely from a flurry of turbojet hybrid missile drones alongside traditional UAVs. In any case, a missile alert has been declared in this Russian region, which comes as Russian authorities are increasingly responding with official government alerts on aerial activity, and rightly so. It serves as a public safety warning, but it also has the unintended consequence of communicating to their general public that the Russian war has come back home to bite, which then leads to one level up on the map, where the threat of aerial incursions has also led to temporary restrictions imposed on the arrival and departure of aircraft at the Volgograd airport, and then further up the map, and where the venturing of Ukrainian UAVs increasingly educates us on new Russian locales as the scope of these types of attacks increase. And now with the case of Udmurtia, where the Rosreserve oil depot was reported as targeted due to its sizable oil reserve holdings. At the same time, with a real mixed bunch of information today, strikes with Neptune cruise missiles has been reported at the Marinivka airfield in Crimea. But perhaps most impressively in the occupied peninsula, with some updates and footage to boot, because in a significant overnight operation on July 2nd, Ukrainian Southern Defense Forces launched Lazar, heavy strike drones from naval platforms, specifically destroying 3 Russian Nebo-M radar systems near Mayak. The confirmed losses include 3 different variants of the Nebo radar stations, with the practical effect of the outcome being that the strikes dealt a heavy blow to Russia's radar reconnaissance and air defense capabilities, effectively blinding more of the occupiers' eyes monitoring Ukrainian airspace. Now, additional radars of this type have been moved to Crimea to compensate for the limited availability of Russian A-50 airborne early warning and control AWACS aircraft. You might remember those. But with an already staggering 3 destroyed, another damaged, and 5 remaining in the fleet used for replacement parts, Russia no longer has any of these reconnaissance radar aircraft to utilize, at least to their preferential operational rates, and may genuinely not have any A-50 radar planes left to use in this war. Then, with so many reports, moving up briefly to Kursk, with new reports on Ukrainian forces successfully striking the Kalino airbase, damaging a storage site for aerial munitions, and likely hitting a Pantsir S-1 air defense system, according to Kyberboroshno, which is a Ukrainian volunteer open source intelligence community. Next up, and where the hits keep coming, in occupied Donetsk and Luhansk, as explosions have rocked the occupied areas for counting up to the 4th straight day now, leading to multiple scenes of Russian air defense scrambling. Ukrainian Su-24 jet aircraft were launching Storm Shadow cruise missiles into this direction, which may go to explain the confusion with other reports suggesting that the jets launched the same cruise missiles into the adjacent Rostov Oblast. But as for Luhansk, the Russian-appointed mayor was said to have taken on a direct hit from these storm shadows, but it wasn't the case. Instead, he succumbed to a improvised detonation device in the streets of central Luhansk, with a criminal investigation opened to determine the cause of the incident. Mayor Pelavov, now former mayor, is a very interesting character. In November 2023, he mysteriously disappeared and his name was removed from official records, seeming to suggest some sort of internal division, or rather fallout, with those higher up in the Kremlin. So the disappearance and death may have literally nothing to do with the AFU, and more to do with the Russian status quo of a backstabbing non-meritocracy. Next to Kupiansk front lines, because as a result of successful counterattacks, the Ukrainian armed forces regained several more positions east of Kupiansk. Then as for more AFU liberations, confirmation of a Ukrainian sovereign expansion into Zagrizova, central to the front lines inside of Kharkiv. But the biggest news out of Kharkiv today, of course, is the Russian MOD's decision to essentially open a new front in the north into Milova, which is 14 kilometers northwest of the Oskil River positions of the Russian forces, and on this event taking 24 square kilometers, or about 9 square miles of territory. Now, overall, I'll start with, this move is part of a broader Russian strategy to establish a buffer zone, aka sanitary zone, along the border with Ukraine, aiming to protect Russian territory, such as Belgorod, from Ukrainian attacks or advances. But now, from a Russian army logistical standpoint, it's really not that well supported by military cargo trains. Not to mention the roads into this route are far from Russia's traditionally preferred main road entry points. Now even more of a concern given their uptick use in civilian vehicles. Same goes for the terrain and landscape on the Ukrainian-controlled side, just below it. But getting into the nitty-gritty here, because it's an audacious move and a decision that the Russian army will have to live with, and now hold at all costs, shoveling more manpower into the north, given the state of events along the wider northern border now. Oddly enough also, this major update lacks sufficient proximity to any major cities. Kharkiv is 100 kilometers away, and that's line of sight quite a bit further, using all these small roads between the small settlements in this region. As for Kupiansk, the same. It's 50 kilometers away, longer when accounting for a proper route, but even then that doesn't really mean much because Russia already possesses much closer positions to that town. Now, these northern regions are generally less defended areas by the AFU, with their border guards and so on, as opposed to other areas, due to a lacking in strategic significance in comparison. But on the hypothetical, Russia could use this as a political victory, well, first of all, as a springboard to attach to the more eastern positions, and then try to go west to Vovchansk, as it looks to consolidate the edge of the Ukrainian map's natural salient in the most northern part of this sector. It's somewhat ripe for the taking. I look at this exact spot every month for the longest time now, because there's always been very little in the way of using even just the tip for another Kremlin political win, and there's not much in the way of Ukrainian-built anti-tank ditches. It's just a case of, as mentioned before, not the easiest location to get through, travel through, or get supported from for their back-end military logistics. But for now, it's a very curious development for Milova, this latest Russian incursion point, because, forgive the laughter, but if this keeps happening, they are strategically paralyzed. In the much broader map sense, opening new fronts here and there on the northern border, all the meanwhile with 10,000 plus square kilometers remaining to take the annexed territory of Donetsk, and another 8,000 or so for Zaporizhia, and Kherson again, that's another 6,000, all of which are their main priority fronts that they're just going to slow down any further gains with. What an absolutely curious state of play. Then headed across to some news for today. So Denmark is intensifying pressure on the EU to activate Article 7 sanctions against Hungary, citing ongoing rule of law violations and the country's obstruction of Ukraine's EU membership bid. Denmark's Minister of European Affairs affairs stated that Brussels must consider financial cuts and all available legal measures to hold Hungary accountable, and that Denmark will formally request the suspension of Hungary's voting rights within the EU due to its blocking of Ukraine's accession, not to mention being part of exploring ways to circumvent Hungary's veto power that can block additional EU sanctions against Russia. So it's a situation that could present a significant dilemma for Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, forcing him to navigate choosing between aligning with the Kremlin, where it seems his physical retirement plan is going to end up, and where the money bags lie too. Or should he, as any country's leader should do, take a much more Hungarian-centric approach so as to not risk the loss of crucial EU financial aid and political support, and thereby also avoid losing the support of the Hungarian people. So the circumstance demands a delicate balancing act with potential far-reaching consequences that Orban would very much hope to do without. It's a new anti-Russian European chapter playing out. Then next, to briefly take a look at the shifting alliances and regional dynamics, especially where it concerns Russia and the directly bordering country of Azerbaijan, which we'll move to now, all the way in the south, because following a string of recent events, including the Azerbaijan Airlines flight crash near Grozny late last year, shot down by Russian air defenses, and more recent episodes where Azerbaijani nationals received inhumane treatment and passed away in a Yekaterinburg jail inside of Russia, the political relationship has taken a sharp dive. Azerbaijan stopped cultural events between the two countries, leading to friction bubbling across media and diplomatic channels. Russian state TV hosts like Solyevov are now openly threatening Azerbaijan on the air, promising drone swarm attacks and even suggesting sending Chechen fighters to, quote, teach a lesson. And all while Russian officials grumble about Azerbaijani Russian language schools being closed. On top of that, the Russian propaganda network Sputnik will no longer operate in this bordering southern country of Russia. So as we can see, Russia's geopolitical situation is deteriorating, marked by a number of growing serious political spats along its borders, and a development profoundly ill-timed given the Kremlin's strategic need for alliance, resulting from its severely overextended 3-day SMO. Then to some more news, and just for a moment to yesterday's phone call held between President Trump and President for Life Putin, with remarkably little to comment on, given this is now their 5th call to date since Trump's second term commenced back on January 20th this year. Astonishingly, my posted meme from yesterday turned out to be somewhat fairly accurate for the conversation, and where ultimately President Trump confirmed making no progress on Ukraine with Putin during this call due to Putin's stated commitment to his goals in Ukraine, including eliminating the so-called root causes of the war, which directly contradicts his claim that Russia supports taking part in any meaningful peace negotiations. President Trump did express his frustration on the matter, but this leads to no discernible outcomes, of course, where one would hope the pattern is clear for the US administration that we are going around in a loop now, just around and around. It's a comedy show. Then to some more Russian hardware news of a sort, at least as the Kremlin would consider it, as Moscow now claims that over 210,000 Russians signed contracts for war in Ukraine in the first half of 2025, noting they did not call it a war still, but rather the SMO. On these figures, and as per Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, and the guy always quick to go heavy on the nuclear threats, said, the pace is quite decent and good, quote unquote. So let's quickly extrapolate these figures, shall we? Because they consider these good, modest half-yearly figures, meaning that 210,000 multiplied by, well, there's approximately 7.5 years now, which equates to 1.47 million Russian soldiers contracted to the war. Now, this is by no means a scientific assessment by any stretch of the imagination, as I'd say there wasn't a great deal of contract recruitment going on for the first 9 to 12 months of the war. So let's go ultra-conservative here and halve this figure to 750,000. No, let's bring it all the way down to 500,000. So 500,000 signed contracts outside of the regular army to join the SMO, with this number not including the official Russian data points provided on 190k soldiers for the professional army as part of the initial SMO operation, followed by the partial military mobilization of 360k about 6 months later. Didn't work out too well for them, so all up, but still not including so many other sources gathered for their manpower needs in the past. This now amounts to an ultra-conservative 1,050,000 soldiers. First question here, where are they all going? And going so much as to necessitate constant, ongoing, quarterly and biannual drives to get more of them. And this quick calculation, conservative quick calculation, is a very interesting figure, 1,050,000 soldiers. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Where have we heard that number before? That's right, on the daily Russian losses stats update. In fact, almost exactly the same number, which I very much still maintain is a very conservative figure for the daily updates, even after all of this time. So by Russia's own admission, they're relentlessly funneling large volumes of soldiers as a means to save their falling empire, but at the same time, expanding its control and wealth too. Losing and winning are unfortunately very uniquely tied in for Russia. Then headed across to a super quick, slightly dark and somewhat classic style of a 5-second funny to round off the video with today. So here we go. Under the increasing weight of international sanctions, Russian automotive manufacturers are now downgrading standard inclusions, with driver airbags in new cars now becoming optional. But it gets worse, because already not included is passenger airbags, which aren't available for purchase even if you wanted them. Then throw in the mix, why not, that bank loans for cars in Russia is anywhere between 30 to 45% APR with a hefty down payment of 25 to 50%, amounting to, you've got yourself the makings of a second world country moving down a notch into a third world country for which there is no return. Or they could just get out of Ukraine. So probably not even. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.